The book of Philippians chapter 3 verses 3 to 10. It's a marvelous passage. It talks about Paul's salvation experience. This is Paul's greatest discovery of life. You can actually call this the essence of Paul's theology. In a matter of 10 verses, he very briefly outlines what he elaborates in Romans chapter 1 to chapter 5. This is the greatest discovery of Paul's life. Not only here, you can see all the 13 epistles that he's written in the New Testament. In fact, the old central New Testament dominant teaching, central teaching is this point that Paul is making. He writes his testimony. He writes his salvation experience because in this context he is attacking the Judaizers, a group of Jews who are attacking the Philippian church, telling them that if you are to be saved, it's not enough to just trust in Jesus Christ, but you will have to be circumcised and you will have to follow some Mosaic rules. Paul, as a response to them, writes this passage, and he from his personal testimony, he tells these people that true salvation does not come from what you receive at your birth, from your tradition, or what you achieve in your religious life. And he uses a commercial language here to explain his salvation experience. If you look at verse 7, he talks about profit and loss. All that things that he thought profit, when he was saved, he realized all those were losses, all those were negative. And places like, in India, where we are full of traditional churches, it's Roman Catholicism, CSI, CNI, and a lot of Armenian man-made teaching. This is a revolutionary message. Because most of the people believe that they will attain eternal life by accumulating religious qualifications, right? Either by birth, being born in certain family, being born in certain church, or by tradition. If they could grasp the central message of the New Testament, just like the Lord opened Paul's eyes, and he opened the reformers like Martin Luther and other reformers' eyes. May God open the eyes of all these people who trust all these things. And in fact, Paul goes on and says all these things that he trusted for salvation. He uses a very strong word. He says it's all rubbish. It's all garbage. In fact, he says it's dung. It's manure. Because salvation is not based on all these things. Let's look at what he says. There are 7 things that he says that cannot save. 7 qualifications that cannot save. They are categorized into 2 categories. 3 things that we traditionally inherit from our parents, and 4 things that we achieve in our life. All this Paul was trying to use this to be saved, but he says it's all useless and worthless. First thing that he says is you cannot be saved by any rituals. The verse says, I was circumcised on the 8th day. Right? Paul says as a true Jew, I was born into a Jewish family. As soon as the very next week they did the ritual of circumcision, he says that's rubbish, that's a loss, it never saved me. How many millions today are living in a delusion in the world of traditional churches like Catholic and CSI, because they are born in a family and they are baptized as a child and they are confirmed after some time. They think they are going to go to heaven. Apostle says it's garbage, it's useless. Salvation doesn't come from sacraments, either it's baby baptism or baby dedication. The second thing that he says, salvation doesn't come from a race, right? You're born in, he says, I'm from the stock of Israel. I come from the line of Abraham, the chosen people. Even that did not save me. No salvation virtue is passed on because you are born in a certain religion or certain genealogy. right? Your pastors can be your parents or your grandparents can be pastors. They can be great people, but that doesn't give you salvation. Religious family doesn't grant salvation. Paul says it's all rubbish. The third thing that he says, salvation doesn't come by being born in a higher tribe or a caste. He says, I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. If you know the Old Testament, next to the tribe of Judah through which Christ came, the most special top tribe was Benjamin. Paul says, I came from that tribe. And even my tribe, my caste cannot save me from sin. I, being in the great aristocrat family, can never make me a true child of God. Right? You can be born in a pastor's family, a missionary's family, or you can be born in even Martin Luther's family, but that doesn't give you salvation. Then number 4, he says you cannot be saved by following a tradition. Salvation doesn't come by following a tradition. He says, I'm Hebrew of Hebrews. I was not only born to a Hebrew family, I followed my tradition. I lived as a true Hebrew. I learnt Hebrew. Right? When the whole world, many Jews were being influenced by the Greek and Roman culture, but I strictly followed my tradition. I stuck to my Hebrew language. We know Paul could speak very fluently Hebrew language, and he followed the tradition. But when his eyes were opened to see the glory of Christ, he says, even following the tradition, my mother religion, my mother church, that's all rubbish. That will never save me. It's all worthless. It is garbage and dung. Just because you are loyal to your parents' Catholicism or CSI or traditional Protestant background, because your parents are Lutheran and you want to be Lutheran, that kind of loyalty will never ever save you. Salvation doesn't come like that. In fact, the loyalty I've seen in many people, the loyalty to those kinds of traditional churches hinders people from believing the true gospel and coming to the salvation experience. I know people who live in churches that has almost become dead and has become a den of thieves. And the argument that they say, why are you still going there? You know it is wrong because my grandfather lived here, my parents lived here, and I got married here, and I will die here. Paul says, it's all rubbish. That kind of attitude will take you to hell and never allow you to be saved. I followed the tradition than anybody. Then he says, salvation doesn't come by outward religion. Verse 5, he says, as to the law, I was a Pharisee. Right? Outward form of religion, he strictly followed. The Pharisee sect was, at that time was highest outward religion. Right? They lived a very strict life. They would know the entire Old Testament. They explained the Old Testament. They went to temple every day. They fasted twice a week, prayed 3 times a day. They tithed everything, even their crops, even the spices they would tithe. And you can boast about all your outward religious life. Paul says, I followed the outward religion to the highest level, which is the Pharisee religion. That's what we see today, right? People outwardly following the religion, outwardly in the kind of dress they wear and the kind of things they do. We see in the Catholicism, priests and the nuns, and they make great sacrifices. They do a lot of things, and people are so faithful. But Paul says all that outward religious is rubbish, because the Lord said, you whitewash tomb. Outside you may look very religious, but inside your heart is still depraved. Right? There is no transformation of heart. You have not experienced the true salvation that gives you a new heart. Without all that, your outward show will never save you. Right? Paul thought all these are profits, but now he says it's all gain. And then he says, salvation is not by being very sincere. You hear people saying, oh, okay, wherever you are, whichever church you are, if you are very, very sincere, God will save you. Paul says, you want to know my sincerity? As to the zeal, I was the persecutor of the church. I was so sincere in my wrong religion. Anybody who stood against that religion, he thought Christians are against that religion, he killed those Christians, right? Can you think about a greater sincerity? He loved his religion so much. Anybody who came against that, he killed them. That's the zeal and the burning zeal that he had, right? He went about killing Christians. Well, sincerity, you can be absolutely sincere and be in an absolutely wrong religion, right? You can be absolutely wrong, and salvation doesn't come from being very sincere, right? I can be sincere about a lot of things and I can be completely wrong. Without knowing the truth, you can never be saved. Salvation doesn't come from being sincere. Finally, Paul says salvation doesn't come by righteousness by law, right? It doesn't come by your self-righteous works. He says concerning the righteousness which is in the law, I was blameless. It means if you look at the Old Testament Bible and look at Paul's outward life, the only certificate you can give him is he was blameless. He was perfectly following the law. And Paul says all these 7 qualifications that I thought are gains for me. Verse 7 he says, what things were gained to me, these things I have counted loss for Christ. And I saw the glory of Christ. When I saw the salvation that comes through Christ, my world became upside down. My values turned upside down. I realized I've been such a fool, such a blind person. Whatever were lost to me, it's not even neutral. Right? All these great qualifications that he's listing, it's not even neutral. He's saying these are the very things that were dragging me to hell. These are the very things that were never allowing me to come to Christ and be truly saved. These are negatives. And these things, what were losses, now I realize those are manure, those are dung. The question you and I have to ask is, have we learnt this new mathematics? We can say this is the saving mathematics. Have you learnt that whatever things that you think will save you, either by your birth rituals, your race, your higher caste, your following the tradition, your sincerity, your social name, how many people just live for this and choose to lose their souls? Oh, what will my church say? What will my relatives say? The reputation in my society, my tradition. Paul says these are the very things that will drag you to hell. These are rubbish when I came to know Christ. Right? Where are you? You'll have to ask your question. Have you inwardly, experientially learnt this new max? Whatever things that you thought are gain to you, when you add the saving revelation of Christ, these are all losses compared to Jesus. See, this is the gospel. Your acceptance before God does not depend on what you do and what you are. Your acceptance before God depends on who Christ is and what He has done. Have you experientially realized that truth? Learning this new max is nothing but the salvation experience, right? Only when a man realizes all that he thinks is gain is loss, that's when he sees the glory of Christ. God opens his eyes and gives him a salvation experience. Even as believers, we can go wrong, right? Initially, the same max through which we are saved, we grow and we prosper and we bear fruit in Christian life by standing and learning the same max, right? The same ground on which we were saved. Our conscience fully resting on Christ alone for our peace and no confidence in our own flesh, right? The moment we see gains in our Christian life, the moment we see, okay, I've been a Christian for a few years, I'm going to church, I've become a member, if you start adding those are gains, that's when you put yourself for all kinds of Christian failure and spiritual instability. May God help us to learn this glorious lesson that Paul learned. Thank you.